Hello, listeners, and welcome back to Quote Unquote with KK. Today is the Teacher's Day, and we're bringing back one of a fabulous teacher, not from India, but out of India. He is not a Modi Bhakt, although in Indian context, it is so binary. Either you are a Modi Bhakt or you are not a Modi Bhakt. And he has also had a one-on-one meeting requested by our Prime Minister Modi when he visited Australia. I'm not sure whether he has turned into a Modi Bhakt or not. But we have invited him back. He was a speaker on our season 4, Professor Salvatore Babones. He is now wearing a Indian topi hat. Oh, you're in a Modi jacket now, huh?
I think of this as a Nehru jacket. Thank you.
Nehru. All right, Nehru,
Yeah.
Modi, whatever.
Everyone, it's funny as I have the hat too, and I actually like the simple white hats. But if you wear one, people think you're making a political statement, and I think they're actually very comfortable to wear the Gandhi style. But not only Gandhi, I mean every Indian man wore.
Yeah, my
the simple
grandfather
white.
wore, and in
I,
some of our religious ceremonies, we wear it, or
I
we
wonder
wear
why
a
the
turban.
practice died out. I find it very comfortable. I really like the simple cotton white hat. I have one.
Yeah, the
And
khadi one.
yeah, and I would wear it except people think you're strange, if you do.
I'm going to gift you one when you are in India, as I was joking just with him
You can go
before.
get the hat if you want.
Not necessary. And over the last few months, he has been working tenuously in writing a book on Indian democracy called The Dharma Democracy, How India Built the Third World First Democracy. There it is. I'm still not laid hands on it, but he was kind enough to send me the manuscript, which I read not once, but twice. And let me just talk a little bit about his book. His book is so well researched, and to prove his point of view and hypothesis, you see 21% of his book consists of endnotes and index. I've not seen such well researched content on Indian politics. Let me also tell you that Indian socio-politic literature and book are heavily biased depending on what political thought or leanings the writer has. And hence, Dr. Babones, or Professor Babones, sorry, I'll call him Prof for short, actually dug deep into the original source of manuscripts and writing due to such bias. And that's why it's such a heavy endnote that he has created. And I would say kudos to him on his new hat that he's wearing and his work on Indian democracy. On our podcast today, like every book podcast that we do, we would like you to listen to his previous podcast with us, as well as buy his book when it is launched in India. But we will delve deep on the topic, and the topic today is the Dharma, Karma, and Artha of Indian democracy. We'll take his point of view as India's democracy and democratic ethos is so intertwined with Dharma and Karma. And you see, our Indian flag itself, the wheel in the center of the Indian flag, symbolizes the moral cycle, reminding both the citizens and leaders of their duty and consequence. And obviously, Artha is the outcome. Artha also means meaning. So, Artha is also the outcome of the democratic process and system of India. India has its own literature and books and writing right through, our Vedic times, our mythological books like Ramayana, Mahabharata, Chanakya, and in the neoclassical times. But I guess the type of research that Prof has done is going to bring out the neoclassical and alternative view. Unfortunately, like any Bollywood movie, there's not an happy ending. He's not killed a villain and there's not a hero. And he leaves that on the judgment of the readers. So the fourth part of what we will talk, or it can become a separate podcast, will be the moksha. And I think we'll delve that, and perhaps that could probably be his sequel to this book some other time. But happy Teachers' Day from India and all our listeners, Professor. You've been a great teacher. I've learned a lot from your book.
I've learned a lot from many people, so thank you to everybody.
Lovely. Let's start on the Dharma, because the title of your book is also about Dharma. And it has many nuances and meanings as a word. It also means religion, which you have talked about, duty, righteousness, and the ethical order that sustains our society. It is also, according to you in your book, the moral compass of democracy in India as well. And you have actually taken it straight to the Western liberalism and rightist approach. And now with all this wave of wokeism, you are trying to bring in a new meaning. Incidentally, I asked one of the Gen Zs also to have a quick look at the book, and they have also had a lot of questions. So the new generation who has not seen our previous fathers, grandfathers who fought through the freedom struggle, have no clue. And they have got some very, very beautiful questions, which I may probably also want to bring in today into our podcast.
Looking forward to it.
Now, I want to ask you, India's democracy is so rooted in Dharma rather than the liberalism and the wokist ideologies that are going around the world today. How does Dharma or Dharmic foundation shape political legitimacy, the leadership ethic, and a future for an Indian democracy? It's a very big and important question, but I think that will shape a lot of our conversation today.
The title Dharma Democracy was meant to communicate two things. It was meant to communicate in a simple secular sense that India is a democracy of duty, and that in the developing world, if we want to spread democracy in the developing world, we really need to start talking more about a rhetoric of duties than about a rhetoric of rights. Of course, rights are important and human rights are guaranteed in the Indian Constitution, and no one doubts that Indians have rights. But rights without duties are sterile. If we don't all have a sense of duty to our nation, then the nation simply can't stay together. Before you can have a nation, people have to have a feeling that they have a duty to each other. And that sense of duty underlies the Hindu nation in India and ultimately underlies Indian democracy. But I also use Dharma in the sense that it's a specifically Hindu form of duty. That is, the meaning of Dharma is inextricably tied to Hindu faith and through Hindu faith to Sikh, Jain, Buddhist, and other related faiths. And that is both the strength of Indian democracy, that it's Hindu civil society in India that has been the basis for India's democracy, but also it sets up the fundamental challenge of Indian democracy, which is fundamentally the role of Muslims, also of Christians and atheists and Parsis, but fundamentally the role of Muslims in Indian democracy. Muslim Indians have not been part of the democratic mainstream in India. And while there are many reasons for that, in the book I go through extensively the legacy of partition in India that led to Muslim Indians being excluded from the Indian national mainstream. There are lots of good reasons for that. It's not anybody's fault. I don't lay blame on anyone for that. If I blame anybody, I blame Muhammad Ali Jinnah for that fact. But the reality is that India today is a country with more than 200 million Muslim citizens who must be incorporated into India's national story for Indian democracy to continue to thrive.
I'm going to come back on the inclusion part a little bit shortly, but I wanted to talk about our kids today. When I was in school, we had social science as a subject till class 7, and that got split into history, geography, and civics. Civics was a 20 mark out of 100 subject, and all we had to do was basically mug it and spit it and get 20 on 20. And it talked about democracy, roles of a citizen, role of the executive, role of every aspect of the Indian constitution, and so on and so forth. And the history talked a little bit about, the genesis of our freedom struggle, but a lot of it was, and is still, I know we are rewriting our textbooks about the different dynasties, and 8 chapters or across only on the Muslim and the Mughal dynasty,
right,
leading up to the British invasion and the transfer of power from the Mughals.
Which is the colonial view of Indian history, that the British are the successors to the Mughals, and thus modern India as a successor to the British ultimately traces its history back to Mughals. Now, of course, that's a manufactured history. India has a history well beyond the Mughals, not just in time, but in geography. And modern India is choosing other historical antecedents. So Shivaji has become a major inspiration for many Indians today as an alternative to Mughal emperors as a source of Indian history. Of course, Tamil Nadu also feeds into Indian history. The Northeast feeds into Indian history. These are all available histories that India can choose from. That colonial narrative is not false. And I really want to stress that to people. I've done a lot of work on the construction of history in this book, and I never say that the narrative narrative is false. I only want to emphasize it's one among many true narratives. It's not the history of India, it's a history of India. And of course, India today is facing a reckoning with with that history, and is realizing, many Indians are realizing, that they have many other, to them, often much more inspiring history than to think of India as the successor state to the Mughal Empire.
And that's what obviously, the new generation is also probably understood this. But one thing that I realized, my son, before he in his class 11, and did a summer training with a foundation to actually make content for school kids in the municipal schools in Bangalore and Karnataka, and then roll it across the country. What it means to be a citizen of India. It is not about rattling the civics 20-mark paper and just writing it and forgetting it, but practically talk about it. And I guess our younger generation, those who have just browsed through your book as well, were wowed, because their understanding of the freedom movement of India and what pains people of India have taken, what they assume as given, is lacking in their attitudes towards the government and the democracy. It all means voting once in 5 years and then it's done, and then keep bashing the politicians or whatever and do it on social media. That level of corruption needs to be, perhaps, we have to step back into reality. It's not about, reels, and it's not about Insta, and it's not about doing a photo op on an Independence Day and then just putting it on social media. It has a much more deeper meaning. How do we propagate this through the message of your book and other content to the younger generation? They have got a lot of questions on your book, let me tell you.
Well, look, I hope they will.
They have a lot of appreciation, because in my office, I've just rotated the book for a quick read and a glance, and they've come back with a lot of questions, which they thought they didn't even know.
Well, thank you. And I hope they will have a lot of questions, because history is always a much broader canvas than what's taught in schools. And for decades, what was taught in schools in India was what's called the composite culture thesis, the idea that India was the product of a Hindu base plus a Mughal superstructure built on that base, which ultimately led to the development of modern India. And again, the Taj Mahal is there for people who want to look at it. It's not false. But the problem with that narrative is that it causes much to be swept under the carpet. And maybe emblematic of this, the most important single figure is Aurangzeb. Now, Aurangzeb gets talked about endlessly, not because Hindu essentialists are angry about Aurangzeb. Of course they're angry about him. He destroyed temples. He built the mosque in Varanasi on top of the Vishwanath temple.
That's
he did lots of terrible things. Okay, but the focus is not on Aurangzeb because the new Hindu essentialists want to talk about Aurangzeb. The focus is there because the old establishment had to make Aurangzeb a centerpiece of what was good about Mughal. And of course, the problem with that is Aurangzeb was terrible, right? But that composite culture thesis somehow had to say that the Mughals were good. The Mughals did good things for India. And of course, they pointed to the music and they pointed to the Taj Mahal, and all of that's fine. There was a high culture associated with the Mughals, but you can't make Aurangzeb out to be a good guy. And a lot of the problems that have sparked so much anger in India have been because an establishment for 40 or 50 years attempted to rehabilitate or create a false image of Mughal rulers who, frankly, were never very liberal, who were never very inclusive, who were fanatically destructive of the religious symbols of the people they've ruled over, and all in an attempt to make India seem like a Hindu-Muslim compact, when in fact the history of India is one of Hindu-Muslim conflict. And that doesn't mean there has to be Hindu-Muslim conflict today, but when you're dishonest about the past, you have trouble understanding the present and reconciling the present with reality. Look, the fact is that Muslims were invaders in India. They destroyed thousands of temples. They forcibly converted millions of people. They were disastrous for the Indian economy, for Indian society. That said, there are 200 million Muslim Indians today who bear no responsibility for that. They didn't destroy temples. They didn't destroy the Indian economy. They didn't murder Hindus. Their grandparents might have, but they didn't. And that's the challenge, is for us to be honest about history, to say, Aurangzeb was evil, but my neighbor is good. And that's a difficult challenge to reckon with. We've done it in America, with and very quickly. I mean, America was at war with Native American tribes, and you can watch all the Western movies where the Indians are battling the cowboys, and that was a real thing. And there was vicious violence on the frontier. But as soon as those frontier wars were over, Native Americans came to be valorized for their martial spirit. That is, Americans looked to what was good about Native Americans, not what they hated about Native Americans. So that today there's no hatred of Native Americans. There's a feeling of guilt that white America suppressed Native Americans. There's a feeling of honor and respect, but there's certainly no hatred. And in India today, what I see is too much hatred. Now, that hatred, I want to emphasize, that hatred has not been caused by the Hindu right. Many people in India on the Hindu right may feel hatred, but the hatred was caused by the false history that they were for generations forced to swallow, even when they knew. I mean, anyone who goes to Varanasi can see that a mosque is built on top of the old temple. You don't have to be an archeologist to know
this. It took years to bring that solution.
But it took years to make it, yes, to do the study. Right?
And it was painful.
And it's that honest engagement with history, I think, would go a very long way toward improving intercommunal relations in India.
We're going to talk a little bit more about the actions and karmas on our democracy by our leaders a bit shortly. But I want to just close this loop once again. There is also a very defensive view about how other religions have invaded and left them constrained in a geographical reason. Let's take the instance of Jerusalem. Yeah. Again, today, only Israel is a Jewish state which is fighting for its survival. Right? And history says that the Bharatiya or Hinduism existed far before the Christianity and the other religions came in. Even the Aryan and the Dravidian texts, a little bit of history.
At least as old as Judaism.
And all the offshoots, the Buddhism and all, existed right from Middle East, Mesopotamia or whatever that place. The Persian area.
Yes.
Yeah, right from there are some remnants of Hindu and other things to Buddhism, which was parts of China and some ancient Hindus architecture, Southeast Asia.
All of Southeast Asia was Hindu until very recently.
Now with the history, what we feel, or the Hindus in India feel, that if this subdivision and this whole thing will happen, will probably end up like a space between Himalaya and the Bay of Bengal or the Indian Ocean. And that's where how many? 800 odd million Hindus will have to survive and coexist. And we cannot be dominated because that two-nation theory that was propounded is now so deep. And the hatred around it, what you have seen with this Field Marshal of Pakistan talking about it and then leading into that sort of terrorism, that's also emanating from cross-border points of view. How do we now bring inclusion over here with so much of things that are happening and so many narratives? We'll talk about the politics of, vote banks of religion and all a little bit later. But this is purely history till date, what's happened. And that's basically moving the society away from inclusion, more into, I would say, diversion. What's the solution? How do we take the history and then reconcile that to a better future now?
The first step is to be honest about history. The two-nation theory was Iqbal and Jinnah's theory. It was never true. It resulted in the creation of a state, Pakistan, that could not stay together. Pakistan and Bangladesh never were a single nation based on religion. They claimed to be, but it never was a functional nation. And I dare say, even today, Pakistan, the former West Pakistan, is not a single nation based on religion. That is, in Pakistan, there are multiple national communities being dominated by Punjabi Pakistanis who dominate the other national communities in Pakistan. And if these other national communities were allowed to leave Pakistan, they would. Contrast that with India, where there is a single national identity, where Muslim Indians report 95% and greater, up to 99%, being proud to be Indian, where there is no Muslim out-migration from India. Anyone who ever has heard the jibe, go back to Pakistan, has to realize that no Indian Muslims are going back to Pakistan quote unquote, or moving to Bangladesh. The problem in India is that so many Muslims want to live in India, right? So something I explain to Western audiences all the time is that it's a serious political issue in India. Now, you're aware of this, but Westerners are not, that so many Bangladeshi, Muslim Bangladeshis want to live in India and become Indian. So the idea that there are two
fact,
separate
Prime
nations,
Minister also announced a demographic thing on the Independence Day
but even if
to
we
course
but even if
correct
we,
that itself.
even if we go back to the history of partition, when India was partitioned under the rhetoric that Muslims were a separate nation and could not live in Hindu majority India, nearly all Muslim Indians chose to stay in India. The people who left were Punjabis. There was an exodus of Punjabi, Muslim Punjabis who left for Pakistan. It was very close. Punjabis were going to be the dominant group in Pakistan. It's understandable that many Muslim Punjabis chose Pakistan. But the other group that chose to go to Pakistan were the intelligentsia. Muslim intellectuals from all over India left to go to Pakistan. We have data, and I have data in the book about the number of British Indian civil service officers who opted for Pakistan. I think there were 103 Muslim Indian civil service officers. Every single one for whom we know their destination went to Pakistan. That is, substantially all of them either went to Pakistan or retired at the end of the British rule. The same thing for the upper echelons of the Indian military, same thing for the Indian political service. The Muslim intelligentsia of India, university professors, lawyers, they went to make their career in Pakistan. But ordinary Muslim Indians chose to stay in India, right? So the two-nation theory was never correct. It never resulted in a mass exodus from India, even in West Bengal, where it would have been easy for West Bengali Muslims to go to East Bengal. We saw that in Bangladesh, Hindus have been driven out of Bangladesh by repression in Bangladesh consistently. For the last 70 years, there's been continuous repression of Hindus in Bangladesh, which has resulted in outmigration. No Muslim outmigration from West Bengal to East Bengal, to Bangladesh. It just hasn't happened. So the two-nation theory was simply wrong from the beginning. To throw it back in the face of Muslim Indians is to sow discord where there doesn't have to be any discord. It's saying that your political leaders 75 years ago betrayed you. Therefore, you who weren't even born then somehow are responsible. That just doesn't make any sense. So there has to be an honest reckoning with history. Now, that said, that honest reckoning has to occur not only among Hindu Indians, but also among Muslim. Muslim Indians have to recognize that they've always had full civil rights in India, that there has been a very accommodative stance towards Islam in India, despite the fact that Muslim intellectuals claimed that they formed a separate community. Hindu and Sikh and other Indians, Christian Indians, have accepted that Muslim Indians, no, they're actually part of our community. So Muslim Indians have to come to their own reckoning with history, to realize that they're part of this community too, and that they have to make adjustments to being part of the community. So just as Hindu Indians have to make some accommodation to the fact that, and I hear some Hindu ideologues saying, India deserves to have Pakistan and Bangladesh back. And I say, and you want the 400 million Muslims? They say, no. We just want
of Kashmir back.
We just want the
Pakistan,
country, not the Muslims. It's completely impossible. In the same way, Muslim Indian leaders have to start realizing, we have to live in this country together for the next 10,000 years. What about that mosque in Varanasi? Is that mosque really necessary, or could we sell that mosque, sell the land, build a beautiful new mosque 200 meters away, and let Hindus have what they consider one of the holiest sites in the world? Let Hindus be able to celebrate their holy site. Muslim Indians have to start treating Hindu Indians as neighbors and friends, not as occupiers or majoritarians. And that's my advice to both sides in India. And that's my advice as a sociologist. I'm not a moralist. I'm not a Swami. I am a sociologist telling Indians on both sides of these divides that either you have to behave in a more brotherly way, or you'll experience a dysfunctional democracy going forward and potential divisions in your country going forward. Who wants to live in Northern Ireland during the Troubles? Nobody wants that kind of violence. Hopefully, Muslim and Hindu Indians can come to the same conclusion.
You have been critiquing the VDEM democratic rating. I'm not going to touch on that. That is for the readers to read. But just picking up from the Hindu-Muslim...
Can I just say very quickly, I'm just going to give like the 30 seconds about VDEM. The statistics behind it are terrible. It's not just a few visible problems, England has a king, so how can it be a democracy? Those kind of cheap jibes at VDEM, they're all true. The problems go really deep statistically. And I think the problem is that nobody else has spent the time to unpack the statistical methodology behind VDEM to realize that it's just terrible. I'll just
But
leave it at
it's,
that. And
yeah,
the book provides the
yeah, I want
documentation.
the readers to read it. That's why I'm not going to discuss that. But
Yeah.
let's just be on that Indian Muslim and Hindu divide. And okay, we accept it. We are the worst country on democracy as per VDEM. Let's just wait for some more time. Let's go to the European nations who have been ranked amongst the top. What's happening? UK, Muslims have taken over and want Sharia law in some of their municipalities and cities.
Well,
There's
I
a
mean,
lot.
let's be fair. That's an
Let's
exaggeration.
but that's
But
something that we keep listening.
but
European right wing have seen a lot of rioting because of whatever Islamists want in there. They were people who came in, but now they want much more. How would democracy sustain, and how would we them then justify these nations on their democratic rankings in future the way they have hit us? I want to bring that issue of the
well,
future. How would we them then justify their rankings as
so
top
first of all,
democracies in their rankings?
a very good case can be made that the status of Muslims as a minority population is superior in India to the status of Muslims as a minority population in Britain, France, or Germany. A good case can be made. Or Sweden. Sweden has a serious, I mean,
Yeah, we've
we
seen some
talk in
riots
India.
also.
So I'll just use Sweden as an example because Sweden is the country where the VDEM rankings come from. VDEM is Varieties of Democracy Institute. It's based in Sweden, but it's funded by the European Union, broadly speaking. Sweden has extreme residential segregation where native-born Swedes and Muslim immigrant Swedes simply do not live together, not in the same buildings at all. They have Muslim enclaves in Sweden that are highly violent, dysfunctional, don't speak the national language. Education rates are abysmal. The statistical difference between Muslim and Swedish native populations in Sweden is dramatically wider than any difference in India. So this challenge of
Then
integrating a Muslim
why do
minority.
you blame or provide that ranking or rating as food for fodder in our political class to subdivide India? That's the moot question I'm coming back again and again. You see, you get your karma back. I was going to talk on karma about what you do is what you get back a bit later, but now that this whole topic of VDEM has come up and you have talked extensively in your book, I'm sure 10 years, 20 years down the line, when all this happens and the US Department religious report also will say they will be ranked down, and what will happen?
Yeah.
India, we are fine, we are biased,
The
fine.
U.S.
But
Commission on
what happens
International Religious
globally?
Freedom, yes.
Is this not going to be a mainstream issue for the world to even look and reconsider beyond India or Indian borders? Or it's Israel and India?
All,
I
all I
just want to ask that in the future. What's going to
all,
happen?
all I can do as a social scientist is assemble the data. And in the book, Dharma Democracy, I've pulled together as much of the data as I thought I could reasonably put in a book for a popular audience. We could always go deeper and we could always go deeper into statistical methodology. But for a popular audience, the book presents the key statistical evidence that the case against India is simply manufactured. Now, and not just statistical evidence, the historical and documentary evidence as well. So take the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. They consistently rate India extremely low for international religious freedom. The Pew Research Center, using USCIRF data in its Religious Freedom Index, rates India very low for freedom of religion. If you start, again, going to the unpacking, the actual allegations made, they're almost entirely complaints by Christian missionary group that they can't engage in missionary activity in India. Of course, Christian Indians can engage in Christian missionary activity in India. That's entirely legal. Foreign missionaries can't. And the entire attack on India seems to have been orchestrated by missionary-connected groups, Western, and I want to emphasize, not Indian Christians.
Correct.
Western Christian groups wanting to use the situation of Christians in India to push for India to have an open door to Western missionaries. Now, in the last few years, actually since the Biden administration, under the Biden administration, Muslim American groups caught that narrative from the Christians. That is, they realized Christians can do this, we can do this. And donors to Joe Biden seem to have gotten one of their people appointed the U.S. Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom, someone who's very close to the Indian American Muslim Council, if I have the name right. And all of a sudden, allegations from Muslim groups start appearing against India. Now, Hindu groups have not ever access the U.S. infrastructure around reporting for international religious freedom. These have been politicized for 30 years by Christians, and just in 2000 started to be picked up by Muslim American groups. But all of this is weaponizing a platform, trying to seize control of a platform to issue report after report that manufacture a false consensus about India. And if Indians are wondering how that's done, just look at Israel. So if you look at Human Rights Watch, if you look at Amnesty International, if you look at dozens of international human rights organizations, you can find their anti-Israel stance. Now, whatever you think about Israel and Palestine, people have strong feelings, they have views on both sides. The rhetoric of these organizations is overwhelmingly anti-Israel, with very little concern for the other side of the story. Now, why is that? If you start looking at the organizations, look at the names of the people in the organizations, you'll see lots and lots of, I don't want to be quoted out of context here, but you see lots and lots of Muslim women staffing the organization. Now, that gives the impression that Muslim organizations like the Muslim Brotherhood have worked hard to get their people, and it's almost always women, because in the Western mindset, women are sympathetic. There's women are victims, men are threatening. And so if they try to get Muslim men into these organizations, that would be viewed as threatening. There's a lot of Islamophobia in the West. It's a real thing. Don't tell me there's no Islamophobia. There's real Islamophobia in the West, but mostly focused on Muslim men who get characterized as being violent, who get characterized as terrorists. So you get Muslim women into the organizations. They're sympathetic figures. They're oppressed, after all, in Muslim societies. At least this is the mindset. And so you get report after report after report condemning Israel. And now in recent years, those same Muslim women at international organizations are now writing reports condemning India. And
there you go. Although
Kashmir,
India and Israel issue
Kashmir
was almost the same time in the 40s.
Kashmir
Israel
becomes
issue and
Palestine.
India's issue. And now it is catching up in India. So
and again,
your book
I
happens
emphasize,
to be very opportunistic in time to educate a lot of Indians and people abroad.
So in the book, I trace some of these connections just to show how the sausage is made, is the expression in English. I'm a vegetarian, but it's how the sausage is made, to show how these forces work. There are no names. I'm not alleging that any one person is anti-Semitic or anti-Hindu. That's not the issue. The issue is, you just look at it and you say, why are there so many, senior Muslim women at a human rights organization? There's nothing wrong with it. Any Muslim woman can decide to become a human rights scholar. Of course, that's a good thing for her to do. But when you see the pattern replicated over and over, the United States ambassador at large for international religious freedom, there's no reason that person can't be Muslim. In the past, it's been Christians, it's been Jews. There was, I think, one Parsi, if I remember right. But when I see that the first ambassador for international religious freedom that's Muslim has been appointed, and then immediately I see accusations made by the Indian American Muslim Council appearing in their reports, I think, oh yeah, I see the connection. This guy put that. And those kind of connections are detailed in the book. Again, I want to emphasize, these are not Muslim Indians. These are Muslim Americans, Muslim Islamic Brotherhood figures. Qatar figures very prominently. Al Jazeera figures very prominently. Al Jazeera is widely cited in the reports produced by these organizations, very widely cited. And again, you have to follow the footnotes. And you said my book, thank you for saying my book was 20% footnotes. That's great. But what really matters is the quality of the footnotes. Right? So
that's what I want the readers to understand, the biases that are built in.
It's been incredible.
I want to conclude this Dharma part, future of India and Dharma democracy. Your book has left it very open-ended in terms of tolerance, but somewhere down the line, the younger generation has to probably understand how do we commingle without the fears of what is happening in the West and Israel about how the country's democracy has been invaded, to create a sustainable model of Dharma democracy in India. I want your message beyond the book to our audience and Indians who are listening and people beyond who want to take a lesson or a leaf out of India's democratic process, and perhaps some Pakistanis as well who want to do Ghazwa to break India into another Hindu-Muslim country further because they want redemption about what we did to them. What would be your key message on this whole Dharma, democracy and inclusion, specifically India, and that model actually replicating to other parts of the world and maybe in the Western hemisphere now that they are also failing and becoming more right-wing across?
I would say read Vivekananda.
Oh, yeah.
Everyone loves Swami Vivekananda. He's always cited. Nobody has a bad word for Swami Vivekananda. I've never heard a bad word from anybody. Let's take him seriously. Let me contrast two views of Hindu-Muslim unity: Swami Vivekananda and Mahatma Gandhi. Okay. Gandhi's view was very Christian-inspired. I mean, he's Hindu. I'm not saying Gandhi was secretly Christian, nothing like that. But he was very educated in a Christian milieu, and he took a very Christian view of his Hindu faith. And in Gandhi's view, it was a very Christian viewpoint of, if my neighbor slaps me, I'll turn and let him slap the other cheek. It's better for me to suffer than to fight back. His nonviolence was extreme, and he encouraged Hindus to accept Muslim violence on such a horrific scale, especially in the Khilafat movement in the Mopalid Rebellion in the 1920s,
Correct.
and then again in Direct Action Day 1946, 1947. He encouraged Hindus simply to accept being murdered by their neighbors rather than fight back. Well, that philosophy is never going to fly. I mean, not only are people not going to accept it, it's no basis on which to build true brotherhood. You don't create a brother by saying, if you murder my sister, that's okay, I'll still love you. That's not true brotherhood. But look at Swami Vivekananda. Swami Vivekananda's approach is much more muscular. I mean, I can't quote him as saying, if your brother strikes you, you should strike him back. I don't remember that he said that exactly. But Vivekananda wants you to treat yourself with respect. Yes, treat your brother with respect, but stand up for yourself. His writing is full of the exhortation to Hindus to stand up and get to work. His favorite passage from the Bhagavad Gita was, I'm sorry, I can't quote the Bhagavad Gita off the top of my head, but was the passage about get to work, Arjuna. Don't be lazy. Stop sitting around your chariot. Arjuna, get to work, get back into battle.
That's the karma part of it we want to discuss, and there's a lot of content there.
His favorite line from the Bhagavad Gita. But Vivekananda said that brotherhood is based on truly understanding your fellow human being, being able to put yourself to understand that if your brother is angry with you, don't just meekly accept that anger, but understand where the anger is coming from. And so I'll just go back to because it's so emblematic, I'll go back to the Vishwanath Temple and the Ganvapi Mosque. If Muslim Indians truly understood how important this issue was to their Hindu brethren, they should then say, I understand, you have this mosque, we'll move our mosque elsewhere. And if Hindu Indians understood how difficult it was for Muslim Indians to give up a mosque, they could say, we're going to give you $10 million and an honor. We're going to hold a festival in your name. We're going to name something important after you, because we want to recognize, we know how difficult it is for you to do. And so we want to recognize that. And that's Vivekananda's ministry at its root. We talk about his universalism and his acceptance of all religions, but the root of it is simply understanding that everybody in the world wants to do good. But let's understand how hard it is for them. So yes, read Vivekananda, take a Vivekanandan approach, not a Gandhian approach. I'm not advising that Hindu Indians or Muslim Indians just roll over and let themselves be abused. Vivekananda would never have said that. But that you should understand why someone's trying to hit you. Someone's hitting me. Let me understand and explain to him, look, that's not what we do to each other. I know you're upset. Let me find out why. Let's come to a resolution. Right? So read Vivekananda and you can solve all the problems of India. I'm confident.
My alternative view, coming from one of the readers and a young person, was, you want Dharma democracy in India, let's kill all the religions and become a wokist, the other extreme. Would that be a prescription for India?
It wouldn't work. Look, the people are what they are. And we have to understand that India is a highly traditional, highly religious society, not only among Hindus, but also among Muslims, also among Sikhs, also among Parsis. India is one of the most religious societies in the world and one of the most traditional societies in the world. So simply telling people, forget your religion and let's all accept a human rights-based concept of society, it's simply not a path forward for India. In fact, I think it's only a path forward once any question of nationhood, once any question of brotherhood has long since been established. The United States, for example, could never have the kind of rhetoric of rights that works today in America had it not been for the reconciliation after the Civil War. Americans had to accept that they're all one country before then they can build on that a philosophy, a rights-based philosophy of the country.
So at the foundational level, the the religion will be there, then we will have to have another layer of social fabric and a governance model to take the country in the future as part of Dharma democracy. Correct?
Yes. Look, unless you have a nation, you can't have a democracy. Democracy requires that we all accept. I mean, and even in America today, people are hearing the news from America. Oh, there's going to be a civil war in America. Americans hate. That's not true.
The
Right?
tantrums of Trump, emergencies
It's simply
every
not
day.
true. People may argue and yell and scream, but no one is seceding from the United States because nobody even questioned that they're all part of the same country. If you look at rallies in America, whether they're right-wing rallies or left-wing rallies, they're all flying the American flag. Everybody embraces that they are American through and through. Now, Indians have that same kind of patriotism, and that's the foundation for having a successful democracy, because you have to feel that even if those people I hate win the election, well, we're all the same in the end. Now, India has built that successfully. It's the only poor developing country, to my knowledge, that has built that kind of solid sense of nationhood. I don't want to exaggerate the challenge posed by Muslim social exclusion in India, but if I were to point to the one fault line, there are others. There's Hindu Muslim, there's Christian Muslim, there's language, the Dravidianism is still there. There's regionalism, the Northeast. These fault lines exist, but they're relatively minor.
Let's talk about karma, actions, consequences, and democratic accountability. And you just talked about the Bhagavad Gita, which is the foundational piece of karma and the impact of karma. I want to say that there is the leaders of India, whatever actions that they have taken as leaders of India in building the Dharma democracy as a way forward, also have carried or done actions which the karmic weight of Dharma democracy and the people of India are still carrying forward. I want to just talk a few things because, the results are institutional decay, social fabrication, erosion of trust, more fundamentalism. And I want to bring some of our prime ministers who have led the Dharma democracy from our independence time. Our first prime minister being Nehru.
Mm-hmm.
The first thing that he did was divided the administrative states on linguistic lines, and which itself is creating different identities across India. How would you have viewed this karma of Nehru? Obviously, there are many more, the Kashmir issue and all, but this itself is subdividing our Dharma democracy because of this karma of Nehru.
I was going to say it's worse than that. The first thing Nehru did was separate Kashmir from the rest of India. the second thing
that we are anyway solving now.
Yeah, the second thing Nehru did was pass the First Amendment to the Indian Constitution that limited freedom of speech and freedom of the press and gave the government the power to nationalize industry. So Nehru did a lot that, well, in a karmic sense, if you will, has had repercussions for decades for problems that India still faces today. Language-based states clearly created a built-in constituency for dividing India along linguistic lines. Now, Gautam Desiraju has a fantastic book on states delimitation where he's suggesting, and not just Desiraju, his book builds entirely on B.R. Ambedkar's book from 1955. B.R. Ambedkar in 1955 said India should not have one language, one state. It should have one state, one language, which is to say that it's fine for administrative purposes for places that speak Tamil to have a separate state, but there shouldn't just be one Tamil state. There should be multiple Tamil states. And that was clearly visible in the fact that if you created a Hindi state, the States Reorganization Commission never suggested this, but following their logic, there should have been one enormous Hindi-speaking state in North India that made up, a third or 40% of India's population. So the logic is clearly flawed. It's clearly flawed when applied to Hindi, but if it's flawed when applied to Hindi, it's flawed when applied to other languages as well. And
that's not a unifying factor still today. From state to state, the way the administrative work happens,
it encourages the creation of
languages.
Sorry, you can see I'm allergic to this issue, and it's not one I want not one I want to discuss. No, you can obviously it tends towards the formation of single language parties, and single language political parties are not really a way forward towards integrating the country. In fact,
it's political fragmentation.
Well, it's fragmentation. I mean, the BJP and the INC Both have national, or at least INC used to have a close to national footprint, and they compete everywhere. And that's really what a political party should do. Ideally, a political party should be organized around ideas for the future of the country, not around identity. Now, India has always had caste-based political parties, but I think the long trend of history is for caste-based parties to slowly decline in relevance as national parties rise. Unfortunately, the creation
I'm
of
going
these
to come about VP Singh and his karma on the Mandal Commission and caste-based fragmentation as well.
We may have different views on that, but the idea of having very large states based on language communities is inherently divisive. Now, it hasn't torn India apart, but it does reduce the efficiency of the functioning of Indian democracy. Because ideally, those language-based parties should instead be policy-based parties. And if there were multiple states with the same language, you might find that. After all, there's not one Hindi-speaking party. Hindi is spoken across multiple states and union territories. There's not a Hindi-speaking party. However, there are Tamil-speaking parties, right, and Telugu-speaking parties, and that's a challenge for Indian democracy.
Let's quickly move to the karmic weight of Jawaharlal Nehru and what it put on Lal Bahadur Shastri. One, wars, famine, food deprivation, and then he had to say Jai Jawan, Jai Kisan and fast on Mondays so that we could save food. Now, obviously the Hindus followed it. Don't the Islamists or the Muslims don't do their Ramazan and offer food? What was so difficult for them to adopt that in India?
Look, I don't know the details of compliance with Nehru's demands for
No, it was Lal Bahadur Shastri.
Look, the point is it never should have been. That situation never should have arisen in the 20th century.
Availability.
Look, that situation never should have arisen in the 20th century, and it arose because of disastrous industrial policies imported from the Soviet Union. Those policies are right there in the discovery of India. So if you want to know where Nehru got the idea for his industrial and agricultural policies, he tells you in the discovery of India he got them from the Soviet Union. And that model was a model for famine and the famine, industrial stagnation, permanent poverty. It simply was never going to work for India. It's a legacy, and I think Nehru's highly respected. I don't mean to, even among people who like to dislike Nehru, it doesn't sound good for a foreigner to be criticizing Nehru. But from my perspective, as a social scientist who's not Indian and has no responsibilities in India, Nehru was a typical third world dictator. He did all the things that typical third world dictators do. He nationalized key industries. He changed the constitution to suit his electoral needs. He forced reforms that were unpopular, some of them necessary. The Hindu code bills were good reforms ultimately, but they were forced without a real democratic mandate. And finally, he passed on power to his family. And
the next in the family is Indira Gandhi.
Yes,
and
but
obviously
it's a classic third world dictator trajectory.
She promised Hindu monk that she will protect the cows. She went back on it and cursed that every member of his family would have catastrophic ending. So we have Rajiv Gandhi, she herself, Sanjay Gandhi. Leaving that aside,
and even her first son,
Sanjay Gandhi.
Sanjay Gandhi, sorry, yes.
Right. And again, karma. And she actually propagated dynastic rule in this country and hardened the erstwhile Indian National Congress into today's Congress,
but
which again is a disaster.
If I can pull in a Christian term, she did ultimately redeem herself. She did call elections. She did step aside when she lost those elections. She did run again for office. Now, she did a lot of things that we can blame her for.
Margaret
the emergency
Thatcher of India.
Operation Blue Star. There's a lot to lay against her account, so to speak. But if I were to make the villain in my story of India, if I were to make the stage play, the villain is Nehru,
right,
who created the situation where his daughter, instead of becoming a normal politician in India, if she chose to become a politician, instead inherited the throne. And
the next in line is Rajiv Gandhi, and overturning the Shah Bano case actually delayed bringing a unified civil code in this country, which we are still struggling to encode. And again, pandering to a certain vote bank and a certain section of that or the males of those vote banks, and has still not been codified yet. We are trying to bring it all together.
I haven't studied Rajiv Gandhi closely. That said, my impression is he seemed to pander to everybody. So that he seemed to be someone who wanted to be liked universally. And while he did pander to Muslim, he also pandered to Hindus. Let's not forget, he started his election campaign from Ayodhya. I'm not an expert on his term in office or his life as a politician. I understand he was an accidental politician. He had no original, Playboy becomes accidental politician.
And leaves behind his wife now to manage the country.
Well, that's one of the great ironies of Indian politics, but there you go. But again, I want to remind Indians, this is not a uniquely Indian story. That story of a family dynasty holding on to power and trying to transform itself from a more or less dictatorial ruler into a legitimate political party, that story is the story of third world politics the world over. All you have to do is, who's the current prime minister of Pakistan, right? All you have to do is look to your neighbors, look to other developing countries to see the story of a family control treating politics, treating a country as if it's their personal property. That's the common story. The unique thing about India is that India overcame that. And India started overcoming that even during Nehru's Congress dominance in the 1950s and 60s at the state level. At the state level, there was serious resistance to Congress. And that state level resistance ultimately percolated up to a national level coalition that unseated Indira Gandhi and that ultimately led to the formation of primarily of the BJP, but also other attempts. The Aam Aadmi Party, whatever people may think of Arvind Kejriwal, the purpose of the Aam Aadmi Party was to be a legitimate modern political party that attempted but failed to become a major national political challenger. But that sort of politics, the BJP politics, the Aam Aadmi Party politics, the Samajwadi Party politics, that's normal politics that is coming to the surface now that India has been, dare I say, liberated from Congress dominance.
VP Singh, very short tenured, but his karma was bringing caste and politicizing caste, which we are still being attacked, and different politicians use this as a card for vote bank.
Again, let's be fair, reinforcing the politicization of caste. The Indian Constitution contains caste reservations. Caste wasn't invented.
But after 70 years of that, if there is a survey done, the lower castes are much better off than the upper caste Brahmin in some states and in certain areas. So how do you rebalance that caste-based reservation now?
So I don't even use the words. I've ceased using the words upper and lower caste. If they're used in my book, it might have accidentally slipped through, but I don't think I've used those words at all because I've never met an Indian who's told me that my caste is a low caste, right? Everyone I've ever met is proud of, his or her caste and believes that his or her caste is descended from gods and kings. And so I see nothing wrong with caste as such. Now, of course, caste reservations raise the question of how do you break the taboos that have existed in Indian society before independence around caste. Now, people like Vinayak Savarkar thought intercaste dining was the way to do it, and publicly dining with people of other castes normalized intercaste relations, and that's probably an important way to go. Other people, and Ambedkar chief among them, felt that it was important to have reservations, that is, people who are from castes that had been excluded from government, ensure that there's someone from that caste in the government or in the legislature to normalize their presence. And as a transitional mechanism, there's a lot to be said for that. The problem with these kind of transitional mechanisms is they tend to become permanent.
That's what. Right? So that's the karma, the weight is what the country is still bearing.
And so we understand, I think we can understand the good motivation behind policies that can turn out bad. Policies to promote caste reservations, they served an important political purpose and an important social purpose. Should they continue? Well, depends to what extent we believe that there's still caste-based discrimination in India. There certainly is some. How extreme is it? It's hard for me to tell as an outsider. I don't live in India as a member of a caste. It's not a good social policy. It's poorly constructed social policy to have caste reservation. But there's a rationale for it. It's easy to understand why it's happened. But as you've suggested, it leads to the creation of political parties to protect those reservations. reservation that had been granted and to seek to get
And
additional
get further
privileges.
reservations for
Yeah,
those who
to
are
get further
excluded.
privileges for members of the caste. And the creation of caste-based political parties is certainly not a positive for the development of Indian democracy. These are difficult questions. There's no look. Very often, you're absolutely right, and you've used the word karma for it. I could use the word unintended consequences. Other people might use the word payback in ordinary
Correct.
English. It's very difficult to address the most difficult challenges of society without, in some way, sowing the seeds for future problems. I don't know the
Let's
answer.
move on
to
to our other prime minister,
Yeah.
not from the dynasty, Narasimha Rao.
Yeah.
He challenged the dynasty, was not
From
liked by the
within.
dynasty.
Yeah, from within.
And his only botch was that he allowed the Babri Masjid demolition.
And it's not clear that he allowed it. Lots of things happen under
Or
somebody.
the whole blame from the dynasty was that he delayed taking action and allowed it to happen. Otherwise, a reformist turned the country from where it was to where it and led it to a path of reform and progress.
Well,
So
he certainly played
positive
a very important role. And Taiwan had a similar story, that Taiwan had been ruled by the Kuomintang, KMT, and the Chiang Kai-shek had become the former warlord ruler of China, had become the ruler of Taiwan. And Chiang Kai-shek passed on his rulership to his son. And then they allowed a non-Chiang family person. The family ran the KMT. They allowed a non-family person in, and he cracked open the system. And the same thing, we could credit Rao with the same kind of cracking open the system. The shame is that opening in India did not become a flood. Ideally, what should have happened was that after 1991, India should have had a succession of non-Gandhi family figures in the Congress party. And
no, we had one, Manmohan Singh.
Well, but again, he didn't.
But the files went somewhere else, and he just signed it, rubber stamped it.
Yeah, but had the Congress party at that point embraced modernization and said, well, the family's had its time, let's move on from family control, India would now have very healthy politics. That didn't happen. The family fought back, and today we have Rahul Gandhi as the leader of the opposition, simply by virtue of his name. Rahul Gandhi, I think it's safe to say, and even people who are Congress voters, I suppose, will accept the proposition that Rahul Gandhi would never have become the leader of the Congress party had he not been Rahul Gandhi, right? And that's a problem, right? The Congress would be a healthier, stronger movement, just like the KMT became a healthy, modern democratic party once the Chiang family let it go.
I guess the curse to Indira Gandhi on the dynasty, perhaps that carries on.
Well,
we don't know what happens
her life
to him.
with it. I hesitate to speak ill of someone who paid for her life for her devotion to her country. I may not approve of her policies. Many of you don't approve of her policies. No one can doubt her patriotism.
Yeah, some people in our family also suffered during the emergency years. So nobody really, those were the harsh times of the country.
Look, I can see Indira Gandhi did a lot of bad things, but was she unpatriotic? I have never heard anyone suggest she was unpatriotic.
It's not about the patriotism. It's about,
but it is, isn't it? Because
killing the democracy and the democratic Dharma.
Well, but if I were to ask you, is Rahul Gandhi patriotic?
I don't know.
We'll
come to know soon.
So a lot of people
when his passport
that's all. So, but a lot of people
issue gets resolved.
And I'm not calling him unpatriotic. I'm simply drawing attention to something that people might not often think about. That Indira Gandhi did much more that was bad for her country. Rahul Gandhi's never been in government. He's never done anything particularly bad or good. He's not responsible for terrible decisions of any kind. But Indira Gandhi is, I think, in many ways, and by many people, including by Narendra Modi, remembered as a true patriot, a flawed figure, someone who, if you were going to write a play about a tragic figure of India, Indira is your character, right? Rahul Gandhi is not loved, and he doesn't evoke the same emotion, I think, as his grandmother. And that's I think that's in a nutshell the difference between them.
Dr. Manmohan Singh followed the dynasty, and the biggest thing was the word saffron terror, which turned out to be, again, he tried doing things which shouldn't have happened. He was a great reformist under Narasimha Rao, but his his karma of dividing and being a member of the dynasty left the country much more hurt, and the dharma and the karma that the country is now willing to pay,
Well, on
leaving
the other
that
hand,
whole
he seems
dynasty
to
out maybe for years now.
On the other hand, he seems to have been an effective economic leader. India did very well economically under his term. There was a movement from an India that was much more violent up until 2002 to an India that under his 10 years in office became a much more peaceful place, not just after the Gujarat and the Gujarat riots, but even in Bihar. Now, I don't know if he personally is responsible for Bihar becoming more peaceful, for Gujarat becoming more peaceful, but it did happen under his watch. So, I'd like to encourage people maybe to reevaluate Manmohan Singh. Of course, he will soon pass away. When he does, there will be a
He's
lot
already
of...
dead.
Oh, he did. I'm
Passed
sorry.
away.
He passed away last year. I apologize. Yeah.
Yeah.
He passed away last year, I think it was.
Yeah.
And I think that now that he's passed away, there will have to be some reevaluation of his time. He certainly was not a great leader who inspired India, but did he do more good than bad? I suspect history will be kind to him. I don't know the answer to that. That's for Indians to decide, not for an outsider to decide. But if I had to predict how will Indians feel about him in 10 or 15 years, I think there will be a soft spot.
We have Atal Bihari Vajpayee. I worked with him also on the farm reforms. He never followed the Raj Dharma, although he was the first, Hindu-dominated prime minister, and he trusted our enemy, Pakistan, that he believed in peace with Pakistan, that led into a very compromising position during his time.
Fair enough. But Narendra Modi was elected, and what did he do in 2014? He tried to declare peace with Pakistan. So
I do not know what happens.
One.
These RSS and BJP guys want to get their knuckles beaten first before they retract back with Pakistan and the two-nation theory. Now the big man, Narendra Modi, demonetization, RSS Bhakt, divided the country into Modi Bhakt or non-Modi Bhakt. That's how people now look at you.
Look, there's
a fascist, and so many other negative things
that's how the
he's
media
carrying the weight
Twitter
of. And obviously, Hinduized the attack on Pakistan by the name of Sindoor. He could have called it whatever else, but he called it Sindoor. So again, too Hindu with him.
Look, absolutely. But, let's remember, first of all, there's not a division of India into Modi Bhakts and anti-Modi people. 60 to 70% of Indians consistently for 10 or 12 years now have had a positive view of Narendra Modi. Now, he's no Donald Trump, right? I mean,
no. He doesn't pick up his phone. That's a separate issue.
Yeah. Well, when 60 or 70% of people consistently, year after year, respect you, now they don't vote for him, right? That is, when you compare the percentage of Indians who think Narendra Modi was doing a good job in 2024, 70%, versus the number who voted for the BJP, 33%, 32.5, I think, percent.
Yeah.
You can see that a lot of people respect Narendra Modi who don't support him, who don't vote for his political party. I think that's telling. I think it suggests that he has not been as divisive as the media and as Twitter would suggest. That is, a lot of the things he's done have had broad consensus. So, for example, you put in our meeting notes for today the Sengul, the symbol, the traditional symbol of Indian sovereignty that he restored to Parliament in the new Parliament. Well, was that controversial? I mean, if I read Al Jazeera, it was highly controversial.
Yeah.
If I read the Washington Post, it was highly controversial. At Ayodhya, something I specifically criticize Narendra Modi for in my book is for playing a religious role in the ceremony at the new Ram Mandir in Ayodhya, that he personally breathed life into the Murti. And I said, no, he should never have done that. Let Advani do that. Let someone, honor somebody else. I think it was a very arrogant thing for him to do, that he was going to be the one to do it. But was that unpopular in India? I don't.
So political parties abandoned it. Now, there is a different view people have, again, within the Hindus as well. And so the jury's out within the Hindus. That didn't translate into the votes for the 2024 election, though.
No, it did not translate into votes. But I wonder if it was actually controversial.
And in the state where the Ayodhya temple
they lost Ayodhya.
He got a beating. But there are other political issues around why he got a beating there.
What I'm wondering was this act divisive among Indians outside the English language media? And again, I'm not sure it was divisive. I'm not convinced of that. Now, on the other hand, Narendra Modi has clearly been borderline Islamophobic in his statements and behavior, not as extreme as Yogi Adityanath, who's simply been instrumentally Islamophobic in his election rhetoric. Narendra Modi is more cautious, but I think if I were a Muslim Indian, I would have no doubt that, I'm not very welcome under Narendra Modi's governance. That said, it's not been, his rhetoric, and again, I'm benchmarking. His rhetoric has not been as extreme as European leaders like Angela Merkel or former president of France, Nicolas Sarkozy. So, is he divisive? Well, he's more divisive than Manmohan Singh. Manmohan Singh was a bland conciliator.
He's more authoritative, though.
He's far more authoritative. But I'm not convinced that Narendra Modi is as divisive as the media wants to believe he is. More divisive.
We'll see the effect of his karma on Dharma democracy in the future. Let's talk a little bit about the elephant in the room, Mr. Rahul Gandhi.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever he goes outside the country, he talks of dividing India and issues around how bad India is. So sure. I'm not sure if he is an Indian or not, as we will probably know. And at the same time, he has gone about bringing issues to the fore, whether it's the caste census, the voting, all these things basically signal that he's trying to show that India is a weak democracy. And, his flippant religious identity, when it's election time, he's an Hindu.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And then, he is a wokist or a leftist or a pro-Muslim. Obviously, the last election proved that his party has now more votes from the Muslims than what it started at the time of independence, if we were to trace back.
Sure.
How do you see him as a future and his karma impacting the politics and Dharma democracy in India?
Well, one thing I point out in the book that it's very easy to criticize the BJP for having not a single Muslim member of the Lok Sabha. But if I were to actually quantitatively ask which party underrepresents Muslims, that is their vote base versus the number of Muslim representatives they have, it's Congress. Right? So that Congress has been taking,
successive governments of Congress
has been taking Muslim voters for granted in India without seeking to represent them and without seeking to bring them into a larger national conversation, instead trying to play on fears of Hindu majoritarianism. So the Congress message is not, here's how we want to help Muslim Indians better integrate into Indian society. Their message is, we'll protect you and make sure you don't have to integrate, which I think is a destructive message for the future of Indian nationhood. Narendra Modi has his own role to play in this, and he's not blameless by any means. And in the book, I'm very critical of Narendra Modi's lack of genuine Muslim outreach. That said, I think the Congress is doing more to damage relations between, ultimately in the long run, doing more to damage relations between Muslim and Hindu Indians than the BJP, because it's behaving in ways that encourage Muslim Indians not to face their destiny, if I may, as full citizens of a free and prosperous India.
And finally, whatever has happened with the leadership and how their leanings are, let's talk about the karma of the citizens of the Dharma democracy of India itself, or Bharat, as we keep saying. Are they actually doing their karma in electing or selecting, or it's just the recency factor that drives them to elect their leader, who in turn brings in such radicalism or religious leanings or left or right leanings or whatever the whole world and these ranking agencies then kind of tend to amplify about India's democracy? The fault or the karma of the electorate also is to blame.
Well,
how do you see that evolving in the future?
By and large, the Indian electorate has done its job. The job of the electorate is to hold their politicians, their elected officials, accountable for doing what the voters want. And Indian voters they will drop with alacrity any politician who doesn't deliver for them. And really, that's what it's about. And that's why I said that in many ways, Congress is holding back progress in Indian politics, because too many Congress voters are not holding Congress accountable. And the obvious situation there is with, if Muslim voters want to see more Muslim representatives in the Lok Sabha, hold Congress accountable. You voted for them. Make sure they deliver on that. But broadly speaking, across Indian society, voters do hold their leaders accountable. They're very interested in politics. They're minutely concerned with how politics affect their daily lives. Now, some of of that may be in ways that are dysfunctional. We already talked about caste reservation. Well, lots of people are highly motivated to vote based on caste reservations. Well, that's not a bad behavior on the part of the voter. That's a rational behavior on the part of the voter. It means the voter's paying attention, and of the choices that are being given, the voter's saying, this is what I want. It's going to benefit me and my family. There's no sense of Indian voters wanting bad for the country. I think we can't hold a voter accountable and say, well, we as social scientists believe that caste reservations are ultimately destructive, so you should be patriotic and not vote for them. I think that's far too much of an ask to ask from ordinary voters. So holding their elected officials accountable, being ready to switch parties. Indian voters have shown themselves incredibly willing to switch parties election after election in a way that Americans, for example, aren't. I mean, American politics have come down to the votes of about 10% of the population who are potentially swing voters one way or the other. Only 10% of Americans are in play in an election. In India, I would say that's closer to 80% are in play in every election. You have to win the voters back every time. And that's what I think is one major strength of Indian democracy, an accomplishment, something that shows that Indian democracy is not some fragile flower that at any moment could be trampled. It is, in fact, a very robust system. India is going to be a democracy the rest of my life and well into the 21st century, maybe into the 22nd. I don't have a crystal ball, but voters holding their leaders accountable is a fantastic sign.
We've discussed about the executive and the democracy. Let's talk about the other two pillars very quickly, because I know we've stretched a lot. It's been an interesting discussion. Judicial system.
Sure.
Have they delivered on their dharma and karma?
I think nobody has a kind word for the Indian judiciary. Look, India's judicial system is, well,
again, we took it over from the British judicial system.
Well, you say that, but Britain does not have a legal system like India. So India's legal system, from the outsider perspective, seems to be extraordinarily dysfunctional and in many ways self-serving.
Are they delivering justice? That's the whole problem.
Look,
justice delayed, or it is just not delivering justice?
Yeah, so the one big question is delays in justice. Now, that's a resourcing issue to some extent. But I think a deeper problem is the self-perpetuating nature of the judiciary. Only 2 countries in the world have a collegium system for appointing new judges, India and Israel. In both countries, it's highly controversial. Now, the reforms proposed by Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel before the October 7th attacks were fracturing the country because he wanted to put all the power for judicial appointments in his hands. He even wanted to go so far as to say that the legislature with a majority could overrule a judicial ruling. I mean, he wanted to dramatically change the judiciary. That's, I think, far too far of reform. However, I don't think you can leave the appointment of new judges in the hands of existing judges. It creates too many incentives for people to become complacent, for them to perpetuate their own, maybe not outright nepotism, but certainly proteges, and to keep a closed system that is not open to new ideas, not open to scrutiny. The collegium system, I think, really has to be broken open. And on top of that, the other big challenge of the judiciary is the basic structure doctrine. A judiciary can't arrogate to itself the power to decide what can go in the institution, in the Constitution, and what can't. That has to be something that the voters are responsible for. India is not a democracy if the judiciary is the one who gets to decide what makes India a democracy. Ultimately, there has to be democratic accountability to have a democracy. So the basic structure doctrine, I understand the legal theory behind it. It makes some sense, but like the collegium system, it's far too open to abuse, because once you have the doctrine, anything a judge wants can be part of the basic structure of the Constitution. And that's just too much discretion to leave in the hands of one group of people.
All right. Lastly, I want to talk, the pen is mightier than sword. That can overrule or kill a democracy is our media, social media, both Indian, outside India, global, technological, digital, physical, whatever. Have they really played their part and their karma in reinforcing and uniting this country as a democracy?
I think that they have much more than they're given credit for. Look, the Indian media, for all the complaints about it, and I read the complaints all the time, they're so much better than the media of any other country I could name.
Then why are we ranked so low in terms of this press freedom and all that crap that we
the low
and
rankings
I don't know what these guys keep
the low rankings are laughable, and I go through it in the book. I could give you lots of technical reasons why the press freedom rankings have been absolutely weaponized. They're meaningless. What the press freedom rankings mean is that members of Reporters Sans Frontières, the French group, local members of that organization who want to complain can get you a low rating. On the other hand, if you go to a country like Ireland or New Zealand or Denmark, where virtually all the reporters have jobs for life paid for by the government, they think the press is fantastic. So India's media. Now, I only have access to the English language media, so I have to be honest. I don't know the status of the Hindi media, the Marathi media, the Telugu media. I can't speak to that. But the English language media in India is incredibly robust, even when we have channels that are clearly biased. Nonetheless, even the channels that are accused of bias always have people from the other side. They always put together balanced panels. They may criticize one side. They clearly lean to one side or the other side, but they still put the people on. They have serious discussions. In the Western media, an expert like me would be lucky to get 2 minutes on a TV interview. In India, I can have 10, 15 minutes to really explore an issue. The print media in India is the biggest print media in the world. Even if you just look at the number of competing English language titles in India, I believe there are more than in the United Kingdom, right? It's just incredible. The media landscape in India is an extraordinary asset for the country. I've been reading Indian media, watching Indian media, and listening to and being on Indian media for 5 years now. I am incredibly impressed. I don't think that India has anything to worry about.
They're doing their job.
They are doing their job. Now, you can criticize individual media outlets for being biased.
Well, you need to have those.
But that's true in every
for the reader to judge who they want to follow.
That's true in every democracy. The question is, does the biased outlet give space for its opponents? So, for example, here in Australia, the ABC, the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, is a government-funded entity. There are long-standing criticisms that there is not a single conservative commentator, not a single one, on any major ABC television show. All of the ABC's commentators are either on the more progressive side of politics or on the extreme green, radical green end of politics. Now, in India, people might make complaints about a particular media channel, but they're always going to have somebody, even if it's a BJP aligned channel, there's always going to be some token congressperson. If they hold a panel discussion, there's going to be someone from the Congress, someone there from the Aam Aadmi Party, someone there from the Samajwadi Party, someone from the Communists, and that's why you get these 8-person panels on Indian
so much
media.
Of shouting over each other, top of each other.
You get, there's much more openness to the Indian media environment than I see in Australia or than I've seen in the US. I mean, in the US, there are 5 Democratic Party networks, and there's Fox News, which is the Republican Party network. And you won't get any Republicans on the Democratic, they won't get interviews in the Democratic network at all. And on Fox, you won't get Democrats getting interviews on Fox News. India is much more open than that. And I think it's something Indians can be proud of.
I know. We'll just quickly talk about the Artha, the money part of the running the democracy, the outcomes of the democracy. I'm sure we have talked at length about the India and China GDP and how those mechanics are. Sure. One of the blames is that India spends too much on electioneering, and the time when the elections are there, India's GDP rises by 0.5 odd percent because of all the black money and the corruption money.
Yeah. And increased government spending to try to buy votes. Let's not leave the government out of it. All that.
So that is one thing. The election year and the 1 year after the election are always growth years, and then 3 years of flat. And then again, the pre-election year, you have a whole flurry of spending. Is this a real norm, or is something wrong about this whole economics of running democracy? I'm not sure if Trump also does that, or the US presidents in their 4-year term also do that to run this. Is it independent?
I'm not going to defend it. I'm just going to say this is how democracy works. Governments open the taps in election year with freebies to try to attract top voters to keep them in office. And then they have to pay for it later because, you can't run the deficits up forever. And India is not alone. And I think the expense of running Indian election is actually a sign of a healthy democracy. it's a sign that the elections matter, right? You spend a lot of money on your candidates, or people are willing to spend a lot of money. Business people are willing to spend a lot of money. Civil groups are willing to spend a lot of money because it really makes a difference who you get elected. And that's a sign that democracy is healthy. It's so easy for us to make fun of money in politics, to lament money in politics. I don't want more money in politics. I wish we had less money in politics. But the fact that there's so much money in politics is a sign that politics really matter. And that's a sign.
What about the U.S. State Department spending, which Trump has now put a pause on influencing democracy and improving democracy process in India? Some, I don't know, it came out so many $million of projects being funded just before the election. Is that also part of the Artha or their karma to influence democracy in India?
It's more karma, I think, in the sense that it creates enemies for America abroad. Because, of course, when you spend a lot of money getting one side elected in a foreign country, the other side doesn't take kindly to it. And I think that it's been more, on balance, more destructive in the long run, more destructive for American influence in the world, for American prestige in the world, than it has been a positive. That said, it has many defenders that America should be working to promote human rights abroad. And as long as it's really to promote human rights, fair enough. We all want to see better human rights. The problem is accountability. The problem is once you create these unaccountable pots of money, they inevitably get spent for less savory purposes. They get spent to promote your friends. After all, if I'm in charge of giving out grants to Bangladeshi organizations, USAID, and I can give out grants to Bangladeshi organizations, am I going to give them out at random? No, I'm going to give them out to people I like. Well, that's not very democratic, right? There's very little accountability there. The money USAID gives out is not accountable to the Bangladeshi people, and thus we can see the undermining of Bangladeshi democracy through the action of U.S. support. I think India is very wise to push back strongly. Now, India allows, contrary to what VDEM and the international media will tell you, India allows foreign organizations to fund political organizations in India, not nonprofits. It allows it. It's just India just says you have to tell us you're getting the money, and now it's a very low bar. And of course in India, which is a highly patriotic, highly nationalistic country, admitting that you're foreign funded is not a good look, and so no one wants to admit it. But what's wrong with making people admit it? India doesn't even have a foreign influence transparency scheme like Australia does. In Australia, not only do you have to declare the foreign funding, it gets put in a public database. Everybody can see it. I'd like to see that kind of reform in India, where all of this foreign funding doesn't just get reported to the government. I'd like to see it put in a public database.
Well, the political party funding is still in limbo, so that's another stretch altogether.
Well, electoral bonds were a bizarre and disastrous effort.
So that's what I said, in the Artha side, less spoken, the better.
Yeah.
But final two questions.
Sure.
It's interesting to talk on this topic, and we have stretched. The first one, what was it meeting Modi one-on-one? And did he influence you to write this book? Or what were the other motivations to write the book?
The book was 2/3 written when I met him. Look, he called me in to have a discussion about my work on democracy rankings. And we had a real discussion. We met for 15 to 20 minutes, had a serious discussion about the international data infrastructure and trying to explain to him why India gets the rankings it does. I strongly encouraged him to make India more open about its own data and that this government should seize the initiative to publish data. And I specifically gave him the example of data about the deaths of journalists. Deaths of journalists are tracked by a not-for-profit called the Committee to Protect Journalists. Now, if they're the ones collecting the data, they provide the narrative. That is, they're the one who put out the report saying, oh, India is so dangerous. They're the one who put out the report saying, journalists are being murdered politically. Well, what if the government had a database where it tracked every case of a journalist death, gave the full reasons, explained who had killed the journalist? Because in India, almost all the cases of murdered journalists were actually murdered by organized crime. They're not dying due to government repression. But of course, Committee to Protect Journalists tries to create the impression that it's, India's unsafe because the government did something wrong. Well, investigating organized crime is a very dangerous thing to do. We applaud journalists for doing it, but it's not something we can charge the government with failure if an organized crime figure. Now, what we'd like to know is then was that crime investigated? Because in India, those crimes are investigated. Committee to Protect Journalists ends it there. Journalist was killed. Well, but was the person who committed the murder, was that investigated? Was the person eventually charged? Was the person eventually jailed for it? If the government provided the data, the government could, I wouldn't say manage it, and accept they could ensure they could ensure that the full story is available. I think he understood the point, but he hasn't done anything to make India more transparent with its data. Indian data is terrible to access for social scientists, very obscure, very difficult. The websites are always down. Indian firms are busy building websites for Western companies and governments. Like, get an Indian firm to build the Indian government's website. There could be dramatic improvement there. But he was genial. He was what we might call avuncular in that he was like he treated me like his favorite nephew who came to meet him.
Okay.
And he was very pleasant.
And what motivated to write the book? I know I've read the preface and it's a long one, though.
Yeah.
But tell me, you've done a lot on India, China, and people in India follow you on the India-China bit a lot. And suddenly on this, what was the motivation to do this?
My own expertise historically has been on development in post-socialist transition economies. So I had done a lot of work early in my career on Russia and Eastern Europe. I did some work on Mexico's post-socialist transition. And then throughout the 2010s, I wrote about China and China's economy. And I initially intended to write a book about India's post-socialist transition into a successful market-driven economy with a prognosis for the future of what additional reforms were needed. I quickly found out that everything I wrote about India was instantly politicized. If I wrote an article about a government reform and it was the Modi government, oh, you're a fascist supporter.
Modi Bhakt or not a Modi Bhakt?
Yes. Well, eventually became Modi. Originally, it was an apologist for fascism. I heard a lot. And I thought, no, the issue here isn't the economy. The issue here is the democracy and the politics. And I just got sucked into it. And 5 years of reading and thought later, I ended up with the book. And the book was 5 years of serious research because it's all based on original sources. Can't trust anyone. We talked a little about Indian historians. Can't trust the establishment Indian historians. They're all playing for Nehru. You can't trust the Hindu Indian historians. They're all, the RSS linked historians. They're all talking about how glorious the RSS was. No, you have to go back to original documents and judge things for yourself. And it was a lot of work, but very rewarding. And if I can say as a final plug, I would encourage Indians to go back and read Indian sources on democracy. I have a particular soft spot for Bipin Chandra Pal. I think that his writing is extraordinary. Sri Aurobindo, of course. And I mean, as you know, Swami Vivekananda has become a personal hero. I had never read Swami Vivekananda before I started this project. Now, if I'm anything, I'm a Vivekananda bhakt. So I encourage Indians to go back and read their own independence leaders. Ambedkar has a fantastic legacy of writings. Rajendra Prasad wrote an incredible book about partition. Lala Lajpat Rai wrote a series of books about famous people in history that is worth going back and reading. Rabindranath Tagore wrote a book on nationalism that presents a non-Western perspective on Western nationalism. Sri Aurobindo wrote a book on Asiatic democracy and analyzing one of the first analyses of Japanese nationalism and how democracy was failing in Japan. So this heritage, this literary heritage is incredible.
This becomes a reading list for Indian people who don't have a clue. I mean, thanks for bringing this thing up. Finally, we want to recommend you for an honorary doctorate from any prestigious Indian university you pick. We can't offer you a Nobel Peace Prize. That's reserved for Mr. Donald Trump. But we can obviously recommend and nominate you. Pick your university and we'll send you.
If I pick the university, it's Banaras Hindu University. My only real on the ground experience. I've hardly traveled in it, and mostly I've traveled to hotel conference centers. My only real on the ground experience was Varanasi. And courtesy of Banaras Hindu University, who put me up, I stayed in their dormitory and had a week as a visiting academic there. And it was truly a magical experience. And if there's one university I could just choose to be somehow associated with in India, it would be Banaras Hindu University.
Well, let's hope we get a chance to get you an honorary doctorate from there. I do not know anyone there, but let's figure that out.
If JNU, Delhi, and Indian Institute of Science are listening, I'm open to you too. but I do feel that connection with Varanasi that
it's a spiritual place.
Yes,
you feel that spiritual vibes there.
Absolutely.
As a city as well.
Absolutely.
Lovely talking to you. I know we have overstretched by a lot, and hearing you is always mesmerizing. And talking on this book and this topic was really, really really interesting. What we do is on a book review, we don't want to discuss the whole book and
Yeah, of
steal
course
the
not.
show. What we want to do is looking more like a forward-looking and your thought process
Sure.
and something which could be material for your sequel. And that's what we have done with 2 or 3 authors on a book podcast where they said, "Oh wow, this is content for my second book or third book or whatever."
The
Following
sequel is going to be a sociology of Hinduness.
Oh wow.
Because Max Weber's Sociology of Indian Religion is now 100 years old, and it's still the major source, and it's entirely wrong.
Correct.
And so I want to do an update.
Lovely. I would love to host you when you're in India next on the book launch.
It's up to the publisher if they arrange anything. The book will come out, the Indian edition will come out in December, and then hopefully
I tried searching on Amazon and I couldn't find it.
No, there's only an import. So it is available on Amazon India, but only as a 24,000 rupee import. It's a very I'm sorry.
What about the Kindle version?
Sorry, 2,000 rupee import. The Kindle will be published in December as well. So in December
because I'm all on Kindle, and that's why I don't.
In December, there will be a Kindle, a fake AI audiobook, and the Indian edition.
And also, I would put the link of your book so once it's available on the Indian Amazon site as well. And thank you once again for giving so much time. And I hope I'm not eaten into your dinner time. So it's a bit dark outside now since we started.
It's fantastic to talk to you. Thank you.
Lovely. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.